Stillman and Company, 102.5, 106.3 The Game, streaming live on Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook live today from the Hiller Plumbing, Heating, Cooling, and Electrical Studios here today, where we are hanging out at Twin Peaks out in Madison. The pregame show will start at 4 o'clock today. D. Mace will be here. Chris Sanders will be here as we get you set for the Titans and the Dolphins. But I think, you know, the big story today, Ian is here today. Hello, Ian.
What up, what
I
up?
think the big story today that we get started on is the passing of Frank Wycheck. And yesterday I got a text from Chase, and he said, I'm really bummed about Frank. And I thought, bummed about Frank? What's he? And then immediately it hit me. And I was like, he's bummed about Frank Wycheck. And I thought, what happened to Frank Wycheck? And so I immediately, like I think we all kind of do nowadays, I immediately ran to my phone and I was like, right to Twitter, and I saw from, Paul Kaharski that Frank Wycheck had passed away. And I saw that, and immediately it just completely and totally bummed me out. Just totally bummed me out. And I think, at 4 o'clock today when we start the pregame show, that's what the pregame show is pretty much going to be about today. At 4 o'clock, Chris will be here. Derek will be here. Coach Les Steckel will join us at 4:30. John McClain will join us at 5 o'clock on the pregame show to talk about Frank Wycheck. But I want to start kind of with really how I felt about Frank Wycheck, which was that of a fan. I didn't know Frank as far as the radio was concerned and anything like that. I want to say that when I got started, when we got rolling, Frank was kind of towards the end of his run over at 104. And so I didn't really know Frank, the way that Derek did or Chris did or the way that everybody else on the radio knew Frank. But I knew him as a fan. I was a huge fan of Frank Wycheck when he was a football player, and I was a huge fan of Frank Wycheck when he was a radio host. And I was a huge fan of Frank Wycheck as an analyst. And I must say this about Frank that I won't say about a lot of people, and that is that Frank Wycheck was an all-time great Titan. He was an all-time great. He was an all-time great tight end. He was the fourth tight end in NFL history to have 500 catches. He was an all-time great radio host. I mean, if you look at what that show accomplished over the years with him and Mark and Kevin, I mean, that is Hall of Fame type stuff. Frank Wycheck had a Hall of Fame radio career. And so, to me, he was, as a fan, one of those larger-than-life types. Like, that's what he was. Because he embodied everything about those early Titan teams. Everything that was good about those early Titan teams. That was Frank Wycheck. It was incredible. Those early Titan teams, and I tweeted this out yesterday, but those early Titan teams, they were magical. Even the teams that have won now, and there's some good moments, in this era of Titan football, which is kind of the second good era of Titan football, though I do feel like we've exited out of the good era of Titan football. But that era of Titan football that started this thing really transformed the entire city, right? Like, I remember when I was a kid, and I've told this story so many times, but I remember when I was a kid, and I was watching a White Sox game on WGN. And the White Sox AAA affiliate was the Sounds, and they talked about, when so-and-so was at AAA Nashville, and I must have been 4 or 5 years old. And I sprinted down the hallway to tell my dad. I was like, they're talking about us. And then all of a sudden, we get the Oilers. They become the Titans. They go to the Super Bowl, and now we're legit. And Frank Wycheck embodied everything that this city and this fan base loved about that team. You know what's funny? We always talk about these teams about, is there enough leadership? Who are the leaders? Who are the guys that are going to do this? Floyd told me with those early Titan teams, they were worried that they had too many leaders. They were worried that they had too many good guys. And Frank Wycheck was very much one of those guys. As a fan, Frank Wycheck was two things. Number one, he was a great player. He was reliable. He came up huge in the big moments. Everybody knows about the Music City Miracle. But what about in a divisional playoff game against Pittsburgh in 2002 when the Titans on a 3rd and 1 from around midfield hit Frank Wycheck for a 30-yard gain only to set it up for Frank Wycheck to have a touchdown? The first Monday night, in fact, we got Monday Night Football tonight with the Titans playing the Dolphins. The first Monday night in Titans history was a home game against the Jacksonville Jags, a rematch of the AFC Championship game. And the Titans down 3-0 threw a screen to Frank Wycheck, who took it down around to the goal line. You know how we always get mad when they run Derrick Henry in obvious situations and they don't get it. They turn around, they hand the ball to Eddie George. He gets hit in the backfield. They go no huddle. Steve McNair rolls out, throws the ball to Frank Wycheck, who makes an unbelievable juggling catch to give the Titans the lead in a game that which the Titans would absolutely dominate in their first game ever as Titans on Monday Night Football. Frank Wycheck was always there for the big moments. Frank Wycheck was a great player. And that was just on the field. Off the field, and I know this from a fact because I heard it from the guy who was at the very top, they went out of their way to say, okay, what can we do to get people to love our team? Rudy Kalis at Channel 4 told me that one day they're sitting there getting ready to do the newscast. They hear a knock at the back door, and it's Jeff Fisher and Floyd Reese that had just showed up to say, hey, let's do the interviews. Let's get out there. Let's roll up our sleeves. Let's get to know the people. And the player that did that the most, who was everywhere, he was at Predators games as a season ticket holder. I remember I was a huge fan of the Nashville Cats, the Arena Football League team. And there was Frank Wycheck. They put him on the Jumbotron, and the place went crazy. And as my mom noted at the time, apparently he was pretty nice to look at too. Frank Wycheck was an everyman, but he was also a superstar. He was always front and center. And I think about what Frank Wycheck represented, about the effort of the Titans, just the way that they played, the way that they grinded, the way that they carried themselves. Frank Wycheck was released by Washington. The Oilers made a waiver claim in order to get him. We use the word Scarbini when we talk about bringing in, just claim that Scarbini from Washington. That was Frank Wycheck, 3-time Pro Bowler. That was Frank Wycheck, who led the team in catches 4 straight years. It was all hard work. It was all getting everybody better. It was all kind of sharing the glory, because that's what those early Titan teams did. It wasn't just about Steve McNair. It wasn't just about Eddie George. It wasn't just about Javon Curse. It wasn't just about Blaine Bishop. It wasn't just about Derek Mason. And it wasn't just about Frank Wycheck. But all those guys together represented an era, again, in which we went from just a regular old city. Like, what was the difference at that point between Tulsa and us? And all of a sudden, the Oilers become the Titans, and we're in the Super Bowl. And there is no magical run to Super Bowl 34 without Frank Wycheck. And then there was the media career. Now, I remember when the early days of sports radio, not just in this town, but really like the early days of the Titans and sports radio. And I used to listen every day after school, or I'd be in the car with my dad, and we'd be listening to sports radio, or we'd be on the way to the game, and we'd be listening to sports radio. And I mean, it was like there wasn't a giant amount of former NFL players that lived in this town who cared about the Titans, who could talk about the Titans, who would give insight about the Titans. And then there was Frank. Frank retired after the concussions. Frank retired, after what was a really, really great career as a player, a great career as a Titan. And Frank immediately goes right to the booth, and he's doing preseason games. And then he's right there with Mike Keith. But, of course, every morning on the way to school, I'd listen to him and Mark and Kevin. And they would get into it. Mark and Frank would get into it. And that was legendary. I remember when I first started here, and that show was still on the air, and there was, hey, we want you to come over, maybe do the morning show. And I'm like, wait a minute, hold on. Do the morning show and try to compete in an environment with Frank Wycheck and Mark Howard and Kevin Ingram? That does not sound like a very good career idea for me. It's something, I truly thought about it because that's how much respect I had for them. I remember when Frank, again, team employee with the Titans on the radio, was going crazy about Ken Wisenhunt. And that's when I knew that Ken Wisenhunt wasn't really that good of a coach. Because Frank Wycheck, while he was working for the team, he could say what he wanted to say. Because what are you going to do? Get rid of Frank Wycheck for criticizing the coach? You'd never do that. You'd be crazy. You'd get run out of town if you did that. Because Frank Wycheck was that popular. And so I think about that era of Titan football because I was 10, 11 years old when the Titans made that run to the Super Bowl. When I became, like every single person in this town, a die-hard fan. I can't explain it. If you're 13 years old right now and you're driving around, I cannot explain to you what it was like in 1999 and 2000 when the Titans owned this city. Owned it. You couldn't breathe air without seeing Titans hats, Titans shirts, Titans flags, Titans everything. And I think about how they took over this city and how much this city loved those players. And what was crazy about all of it was those players loved this city back. That's why they all stayed here, right? Steve McNair stayed here. Eddie George stayed here. Derek Mason stayed here. Chris Sanders stayed here. Blaine Bishop stayed here. But there might not be anybody on that team that embodied the relationship between the fans and what that team stood for and what we as fans were excited to cheer about every single Sunday than Frank Wycheck. When I don't use the term legend very often, but as far as this city's concerned, we lost a legend yesterday. And when I think about Frank Wycheck, I hurt for the team, I hurt for the city, I hurt for the community, I hurt for our friends at 104.5 that worked with Frank every day. I hurt for his family. I really hurt for Kevin Ingram because I know how hard it was for me to lose one radio partner. And in the last 2 years, Kevin Ingram's lost two. And again, I didn't know Frank the guy. I knew Mark. In fact, when Mark had left 104.5 and his non-compete was up, I went to Ryan Porth and I said, hey, we need to put Mark Howard on the pregame show. Because that show was so popular back in the day, and that when you heard those three, you knew those three, you knew it was Titans. And it was really enjoyable to work with Mark for a year and get to know him and, just the things we would talk about off the air, and he'd talk about the old days of radio and how things used to be and everything else. And, of course, the walk-off that he had with Frank. And I just know, the magic that those guys had and how incredibly hard in this industry it is to make something like that. We talk about the coach and the general manager here for the Titans all the time about do they like working together? Do they not like working together? They were put together. Is this a right fit? Is this a – and what that all boils down to is chemistry. And what those three guys had in the morning was the epitome of great chemistry. And again, I just keep thinking about Kevin and about every morning waking up with those two guys and to know that those two guys aren't here anymore. And I think about our city, and I think about the kind of legend that Frank Wycheck was as a player, as a radio host, and as an analyst. And I would say that we all lost somebody really special. So now we'll take some phones on Frank. 615-737-1025 is our phone number, 615-737-1025 if you want to weigh in, if you've got a thought on Frank. And then there's another thought that I have about Frank Wycheck's career that I think still matters today, that I think is still applicable to the NFL, that I don't think is just still applicable to the NFL, but I actually would argue is still applicable to right now, to the Titans situation right now. We'll get to that coming up. 615-737-1025. We are live today at Twin Peaks in Madison again. Ahead of Titans and Dolphins, our pregame show starts at 4 o'clock. Chris and Derek will be here, and we will dedicate most of the pregame show today to Frank Wycheck. We'll have their thoughts. Coach Les Steckel at 4:30, John McClain at 5 o'clock, and, of course, we'll do the pregame show as we always do. But Frank Wycheck, gone at 52 years old, way too soon.
The Tennessee Oilers and head coach Jeff Fisher can take pride in their accomplishments of 1997. But the key to future success for the Oilers lies in the continuing development of their talented young stars. Surrounding Eddie George and Steve McNair again next season will be tight end Frank Wycheck and wide receiver Chris Sanders.
Pro Bowl tight end Frank Wycheck has led the Oilers in receptions for the last 3 seasons. Over his career, Wycheck has caught more passes than any other tight end in team history. His 70 grabs were also best among all NFL tight ends in 1998. With his power and sure hands, Wycheck will be a vital element in the Titans' attack in 1999.
Fires into the end zone, and a touchdown! Wycheck with a sensational leaping catch in the end zone and a ball.
Tight end Frank Wycheck was a favorite target, making him the team's leading receiver for the 4th consecutive season. He extended his streak of games with at least 1 reception to 55, en route to his 2nd consecutive Pro Bowl appearance.
Touchdown! Titans! Frank Y2K check!
A little NFL films there, remembering Frank Wycheck. Again, 52 years old, but an all-time great Titan. Somebody texted into the text line, and they said the reason that Frank Wycheck was a part of so many important plays and big moments and everything else is because he made the big moment. And there is no doubt about that. There is none. I do see your phones, and we will get to them at 615-737-1025. But I do want to say one thing about Frank Wycheck, that I don't know if I believe this because Frank Wycheck was an example of this, or if I believe this because Frank Wycheck was kind of my first experience of this. But when I see a young quarterback that is developing, and I'm thinking, okay, what do I need to do to help out the young quarterback? I think about what Frank Wycheck meant to Steve McNair and how Frank Wycheck was the guy who Steve McNair always went to in the early years where he was developing into a top-flight quarterback. Now, when they got to 2003, Wycheck was having concussion issues. The year that McNair won the MVP, Aaron Kenny had kind of ascended as a tight end. And at that point, Steve's number 1 guy was Derek Mason. But I don't think Steve McNair becomes the quarterback that he became if it's not for, as he's learning on the job as a young quarterback, working with a sure-handed, dependable tight end who also played a huge part in the running game, which is what Frank Wycheck did. Frank lined up in the backfield as a fullback. Frank get out on the end and block somebody. Frank could run great routes. Frank had great hands. Frank was deceptively fast. And I look around the NFL, and I see, for instance, in Houston, did you guys see any of that game yesterday between the Jets and the Texans, C.J. Stroud, with no Dalton Schultz, with no Tank Dell, with no Nico Collins? Looks a lot like Bryce Young and Will Levis do right now. But one of the things that I thought was instrumental in the development of the success early that C.J. Stroud's had is that the Texans went out and brought in a legitimate starting tight end in Dalton Schultz. And so, again, I have always thought this, that if you are going to develop a young quarterback, you've got to get him a good tight end. A dependable tight end, a third down tight end, a red zone tight end. I mean, a good tight end. And I don't know if it's because, again, my first experience of seeing a young quarterback become a star was Steve McNair, and Steve McNair had the tight end in Frank Wycheck, or if Frank Wycheck is just an example of that. But I firmly believe that. And again, I look at what the Titans have right now as they try to develop a young quarterback. And let me just say this. This team could use a Frank Wycheck. This team could use that kind of player. The kind of star he was, but also what he brought to the team on the field. Leading the team in receptions almost every year. I mean, one of those NFL films cuts we just played talked about how Frank Wycheck led the NFL in 1998 in receptions at tight end. You know, Tony Gonzalez was in the NFL back then. Shannon Sharp was with the Broncos winning Super Bowls back then. And Frank still led the league. So, again, I don't know if it's exactly just, hey, I want everything to be like the first team with the first star quarterback that I ever saw. I have no idea. Or if you really do. I mean, look, Patrick Mahomes had Travis Kelce. If you really need that tight end. But Frank was an example of what helps a young quarterback. That it's not the young quarterback by himself. It's the village around the young quarterback. And when I think about the guys the Titans had around Steve McNair, whether it was Bruce Matthews, Eddie George, Frank Wycheck, it's like that's how you keep a young quarterback from failing. 615-737-1025. Our phone lines are driven by WilsonCountyHyundai.com. A lot of you want to weigh in on Frank, and so we are to you next. As we remember Frank Wycheck here today, Stillman and Company, 102.5, 106.3 The Game.
3rd and 1, and no sneak this time. What protection. Someone's got to be open. The long play. Wycheck to the 4-yard line. The tight end was open. Look at this. On top of it only being a 3-man rush, the 3 rushers are afraid of McNair's running ability, so that slows them down even more. And a complete whiff in the Steelers secondary. You don't lose track of Frank Wycheck. 39-yard play. Fires to the end zone, touchdown, and how appropriate. It's Wycheck with a score.
There you go. That was the 2002 playoff, the divisional win against Pittsburgh. Titans get out to a big lead. They lose Eddie George, and there's Frank Wycheck setting them up for the touchdown, and Frank Wycheck catching the touchdown. Phone lines driven by WilsonCountyHyundai.com as we remember a Titans legend today, and Frank Wycheck. Willie has been waiting patiently and is going to kick us off on Frankie. Thank you for calling and waiting. Go ahead, Willie.
Can you hear me?
Yep, go.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Go.
Yes. Hey, thanks for taking my call. I'll be really quick. Hey, man, when I was Frank Wycheck just came to my school and he talked to the kids. He had a really, I can't say enough about, man, Frank. And he was just one of the nicest guys. He took pictures with the kids. And I'll leave it there, man. Thanks for taking my call, but he was an awesome guy. Take it away, man. Thank you.
No, thank you for your call, Willie. What's crazy to me, and again, I didn't know Frank, Willie and Derek knew Frank, and I didn't know Frank, what Chris is going to be here, and Les Steckel and John McClain, and I didn't know him like that. I only knew him from the fan perspective. And I was just thinking about, how many shows did Frank Wycheck do? How many events was Frank Wycheck at? And yet, all this time, Jeff Fisher said when they got here, he was the first guy off the bus to say, okay, this is our new home. We're going to embrace it. And yet, I don't think I ever heard anybody say over the years that, oh, yeah, Frank Wycheck spent way too much time going out to other events or doing charity or, if you take one of these old Titans programs, I got these old Titans programs from back in the day. We moved when I was a senior in high school. And so it's like a bunch of stuff just got, thrown in boxes and they're in closets and whatever. And they got these old programs from back in the day. One of my favorites was I was looking at it when Floyd died. And that was kind of when I started to go through these old programs and look back to the old days. And one of my favorite things is that there's an ad for some wireless company I've never heard of before. I forget what it's called, but it's got an ad with Chris Sanders, Corey Fleming, who was on the Nashville Cats, played at UT, and I think Carl Pickens. And it was the three of them with these tiny little flip phones, and it was like, those who know the best about reception trust this company. So that's how old we're talking about. And Frank must have been on every other page. Not just the page about Frank Wycheck where they had every player had their own little bio page. But then, the page about the game last week, there's a picture of Frank Wycheck because he had 9 catches for 64 yards and a touchdown. And then you flip the page to the team going to Fort Campbell, and there's Frank Wycheck. And then you flip the page, and there's an ad for a car dealership or something, and there's Frank Wycheck. And he was everywhere. And again, I was 9, 10 years old, and I was, wanting to hear good things about the Titans. I wanted to be as optimistic as some of you guys that sometimes I think can't see clear nowadays. So I only wanted to hear the good and believe in the good and things like that. And so let's take this with a grain of salt. But it's like, with those Titan teams, they didn't have any problems with attitudes or leadership or responsibility or anything like that. I can't ever remember anything like that. That's why when Pac-Man showed up, it was like, holy crap, this is a new, different kind of, this is a new, different kind of player. I don't know if I remember, what it's like to have those kind of players compared to the players that we're used to. And again, that's not a knock at Pac-Man. That's just what the city of Nashville was used to because they had guys like Frank Wycheck. One texter into the text line said, I remember Frank writing a piece on Pac-Man, said the Titans will never win a Super Bowl with players like Pac-Man. I just loved his brutal honesty. What I will say, my remembering of Frank Wycheck during the Pac-Man era is this. When I was a junior in high school, junior, senior, I can't remember, Chad Withrow used to do the Friday night football show on 104. And I would go to these high school games and call in and give a report or whatever. And again, I was a senior in high school. And I thought it was super cool that Chad Withrow was having me do this. That's how far back Chad and I go. And I remember I was covering a game at Pearl Cone, who, by the way, just won a state championship. And I was covering a game at Pearl Cone, and I had on like a little lanyard that said 104.5, and I was standing, and this guy says to me, he goes, you need to have a talk with Frank Wycheck about those things he's saying about Pac-Man in the morning. Keep in mind, I'm a junior in high school. You think I don't know Frank Wycheck. You think I'm going to sit there and say, okay, hey, Frank, this guy at Pearl Cone's really mad at you about what you said about Pac-Man. Like, you really think I'm going to do that? And, of course, the answer is no. But, like, that is what I remember. And I actually thought about that yesterday. That is what I remember about Frank Wycheck and Pac-Man. And now you'll never get that unless it's somebody who's grandfathered in. Like Scott Zolak in Boston can get away with this, which is funny because he and Frank, I believe, were college teammates at Maryland. But Scott Zolak at Boston can do that. Most people can't do this. Where the guy who's the color analyst of the team will sit there and say, well, we're going to win a Super Bowl with this guy. This guy, he's terrible. He's got to go. He's this, he's that. But Frank could. Because, again, what are you going to do? You going to sit there and tell Frank Wycheck that he's wrong? I mean, you can't do that. Somebody says it was GTE Wireless, which later became Verizon. That was the ad that Chris Sanders and Carl Pickens were a part of.
I was going to say there's an Alltel Wireless somewhere in there, too, I feel like.
So Alltel, I don't know if you remember this, but Alltel was the wireless company that had the naming rights to the Jag Stadium. And back when those Titans used to go to Jacksonville and win every time, Jeff Fisher would call it their third home.
Okay.
Or their second home. Or
I knew there was
like
an Alltel Cellular somewhere in there.
I'll just tell you this right now. The old man was not happy about that. I got Jeff Fisher getting out there saying, oh, yeah, this was our second home right here. The old man was not happy about that. Randy texts in and says, was Frank's illness concussion-related or something else? The family put out a statement yesterday in which they said Frank had a fall at his home on Saturday and was found unresponsive later. I am not a doctor. I am not going to draw any conclusions to that. The family's asked for privacy at this time. I plan on giving them that. And again, what I'll say about Frank is that what he was as a player, is what I think should be discussed today. What he was in this community as a talk show host is what should be discussed today. I saw Zach Pillar said in the paper that he talked to Frank last week and that Frank was doing great. And that makes that even harder to swallow about the untimely passing of Frank. One texter says he's probably up there right now arguing with Mark. You know, I do wonder this, right? If you're Frank Wycheck and you get up there and you've got two options. Like, is Frank going to look at Steve McNair and say, hey, man, hold on, we'll go run some plays in a little bit, but I have to argue with Mark Howard? Or does Frank tell Mark, look, dude, I spent enough time talking to you. I'm going out there and playing some ball. And I'm sure he loved Mark, but it might be the second one right there. Man, I really am. When I think about Mark and Frank, and I'm really bummed out for Kevin. I'm really bummed out for Kevin Ingram today. Because for me personally, and I know that Floyd and I probably had a much different relationship than a lot of radio hosts and partners have because he was so much older than me and so much more accomplished than me that it was just like a natural thing to look up to him. But when he passed away, I remember thinking to myself, like, how do police officers do this job? They ride around in the car every day with somebody. That person's got their back through thick and thin. They're always together. They're always talking about their lives and things like that. And then all of a sudden, that person's gone. And I just don't understand how these police officers get over that. And I think about how long Kevin worked with Mark and Frank. And how much, I mean, how old's Kevin? Ian, how old's Kevin? What do you think, like 50?
Mm-hmm. Something like that.
Okay, well, that show started like 20 years ago. So you're talking about from like 30 to 45 every day with those two dudes. That's like a big part of life. And it must be really, really hard on Kevin. And I, of course, think about Frank's girls and his grandkids and everything else. And I just hate it for his family. But as a broadcaster, I can empathize so much more with Kevin, and I know Kevin. And that's where I just think about Kevin, and I'm like, man, I'm really thinking about him today. Because I know what the impact Frank had on the city as a player, what he had on a lot of people, like as a fan, what he had. I know about all of that. But if that was what it was like for people that didn't know Frank like me, I can only imagine what it was with one of, for his partner. 615-737-1025 is our phone number, 615-737-1025. We'll hit some more of your phones. Plus, there was a nugget that Frank's family did choose to release that actually makes me think about kind of the end of what we remember of Frank's public life. And I do want to touch on that, and we'll do that coming up next. 615-737-1025. If you've got a thought on Frank, get it in there. Stillman and Company. Again, we're live at Twin Peaks in Madison, where the pregame show starts at 4 o'clock today. Coach Les Steckel at 4:30. John McClain at 5 o'clock here today on the program. And I would be remiss, as we're out here in Madison, if I don't mention the incredibly scary and life-changing storms that we had over the weekend. And as I was sitting there watching the news and seeing that the storm was kind of north of me out into this area, I thought to myself, this city, we can't catch a break. In an effort to aid those affected by the tornadoes from the weekend, the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee and the United Way of Greater Nashville have activated emergency relief funds. For more information on how you can donate, visit cfmt.org.
Tennessee into Baltimore territory for the first time in the game, just shy of the 45. Good protection for McNair. And he throws, is it complete? It is, to the 31. And Frank Wycheck, who is probably going to call it a career when the playoffs are done, picks up 14 yards.
Yeah, but Steve McNair will always tell you, I don't care about all the other receivers he has, that man, Frank Wycheck, catching this ball here is his go-to guy. He said he always has been, and he will be.
One of only 4 tight ends ever with more than 500 catches in his career, and Tennessee moves the ball to the Raven 31.
One of Frank Wycheck's final catches with the Titans in the playoff game against the Ravens in 2003. And you hear right there, hey, Steve McNair on the ABC broadcast, Steve McNair says that's my guy right there when talking about Frank Wycheck. Shane is up next here on Stillman & Company. Again, we are live out at Twin Peaks in Madison with the pregame show at 4 o'clock. Shane, go ahead.
Hey, thanks, Jared. I really appreciate taking calls, too. Yeah, absolute tragedy. Was watching the games yesterday, and then saw with Frank, and 52 years old, and I was talking to some guys that played semi-pro ball. I guess the word is he fell down some stairs, and my heart goes out to the family. I do want to say this real quick. I know we're going to hear maybe some moment of silence tonight, as we should, but thumbs down to Sunday night game last night. They should have. Cowboys and Eagles, Frank's from Philadelphia. They should have did a moment of silence, during that game for Frank. And, I thought it was not good. Mike Tirico and Chris Collinsworth, I was waiting for them to do a memoriam or tribute to Frank Wycheck, and didn't see it, and I was very disappointed. I wanted your thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't have an issue. Thank you for the call, Shane. I don't have an issue with that. Frank didn't play for either team. Frank was from Philly, but the game was in Dallas. I do think that tonight, and I hope they do this tonight. I hope they have a moment of silence for Frank before the game. And I hope that ESPN shows it. Because Frank Wycheck was an all-time great Titan. I think back to Floyd being put into the Titans Ring of Honor. And in his statement that he gave the Titans or whatever it may have been, and this was honestly the last public thing that he ever said or did, he talked about how being put into the Ring of Honor as a member of the Titans is the second highest honor that any individual can have in an NFL career, is to be inducted into their team's Hall of Fame. The only thing that's above your team's Hall of Fame in the NFL is the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And so Frank is a member of that Ring of Honor. He is a member of the Titans Hall of Fame. And so I hope today, and I would expect this, look, if something happened to a Dolphin great, and there have been many over the years, right? Ian, I kind of want to name some names and say well, if it happened to this guy, but I don't want to do that. It makes me feel uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what I'm talking about. Let's say Dan Marino, okay? And again, we hope for a long life for Dan, and we hope everything. But if I would expect at Nissan Stadium there to be a moment of silence before you play the Dolphins in remembrance of Dan Marino. Not that anything happened to Dan, and we hope that there's not a moment of silence for Dan for a long, long time. And I hope they do that tonight. I hope they show it on TV. I also think that on Sunday, it'll be really apropos to wear the Oiler throwback uniforms in a game in which I expect the Titans to absolutely go out of their way to honor Frank. Whether it is painting the end zones, whether it is a number 89 on the field, whatever it may be, I really hope that they, and I not that I think they wouldn't do that. I fully expect them to have a serious moment there in honoring Frank on Sunday against the Texans. And I do think that, again, talking about apropos and coincidence and everything else, it'll be good that it's the Texans, so the Houston media will be in town. So if there's any, kind of Houston story one way or another, that will be reported and will be celebrated on Sunday for Frank's sake. One texter says, I used to run marathons, and I trained to run the Music City Marathon 1 year before it was as big as it is now. The day of, without any training, Frank Wycheck just showed up and decided to run it. And he did. He beat me, the texter says. So many great Frank stories. Texter said, Frank was a ladies' man. Let me just say this. Like I said, my mom made many comments about her affinity for Frank Wycheck over the years. Texter said he was a genuine guy. One ticket is that he gave is in a framed plaque, the inaugural Oilers game against the Raiders. He did a lot for Special Olympics, which my brother is thankful for. Hence, he takes care of those in need. I think that's really well said. One texter says, I know Frank had mentioned donating his brain to CTE research. He knew he had issues many years ago. So that is one thing that was mentioned in the statement, that Frank, that the family will donate his brain upon his wishes to some more of the research that they've been doing. I'll say this about Frank Wycheck. Frank was very front and center early on when concussions started to really be a thing in the NFL. For years it was just total deny. Oh, this is nothing. This doesn't have anything to do with anything. This doesn't. And I mean, it was, I don't want to say like politically charged, but it was definitely like there was an agenda as far as the NFL was concerned about not wanting people to realize, or maybe they just, wanted to cover their ears and say la, 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 whenever it came to concussions and head trauma and everything else. And Frank Wycheck early on was a guy who said, no. I've got it. I think I've got CTE. I have these problems that have come from this. And I think it takes a lot of chutzpah for a former player to say that, who is currently working for an NFL team, which at the time, Frank was the color analyst for Titans Radio. And so, that's something that, hey, man, you got to watch your back on with the NFL about what the... And it didn't bother Frank. He talked about it openly. And, that's why I talked about a couple weeks ago, Will Levis put a ball out there for Tajay Spears. And I kept saying to you guys, I go, if this were 20 years ago, that throw that he made, and that's Ray Lewis, or that's Rodney Harrison, or that's Ed Reed, or one of those guys out there, that is serious trouble. And not only is it serious trouble, what would have happened to Tajay Spears in that case, but ESPN would have a segment on Monday Night Countdown called Jacked Up, where they'd sit around and say, he got jacked up. And that was kind of the mentality as far as football was concerned back then. And now, because of guys like Frank, instead of this idea of denying it or ignoring it or anything like that, Frank made sure that everybody knew the trouble that he was going through. And I do think that the reason the concussion protocol exists is because of guys like Frank Wycheck that have said, hold on, wait a minute, no. This is an issue. One texter says, my mom did Frank Wycheck's hair, and she said that he was one of the most genuine people that she ever met. Again, I didn't know Frank. But I remember rooting for Frank. I remember the persona that he was. And it sounds like listening to Willie and listening to Derek. And, I'm really looking forward at 4 o'clock when Chris is here to hear what he has to say. Now, Coach Les Steckel is going to come on at 4:30 on the pregame show. Months ago, Coach Les Steckel texted me because he was looking for Frank's phone number. He wanted to reach out to wish Frank a happy birthday. And that's how cool they were. And it certainly sounds like Frank Wycheck left behind him the legacy of a legend. And that fits because in this town, he was one. 615-737-1025 is our phone number, 615-737-1025. Again, at 4 o'clock, Derek Mason, Chris Sanders. We will remember Frank Wycheck, Coach Les Steckel at 4:30, John McClain at 5 o'clock. I mean, we almost, other than checking in with TD at the stadium, we never have guests during the pregame show, but we will today as we remember a legend and Frank Wycheck. Stillman and Company continues. So about Hiller Plumbing, Heating, Cooling, and Electrical. That's right. I love Hiller. Hiller takes great care of my home, and they can do the exact same for you. They're wonderful. Hiller's Cash for the Holidays promotion is back, and they're giving away cash for the holidays with select purchases. Hiller wants to make sure every child experiences the joy of Christmas this year, so they're donating $50 in Toys for Tots with every tankless water heater purchase. And they're giving away a $250 Visa gift card with each unit. Get a $500 Visa gift card when you buy select new HVAC systems, or get a $500 Visa gift card with the purchase of any new whole home generator. And these purchases all have great financing options with low monthly payments. These deals are only available today until the end of the year, so schedule today at happyhiller.com. Stillman and Company, 102.5, 106.3 The Game, streaming live on Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook live from the Hiller Plumbing, Heating, Cooling, and Electrical Studios today. We are live at Twin Peaks, home of 29-degree drafts, wall-to-wall sports. In fact, they got all the TVs up here right now for the Titans and the Dolphins today on Monday Night Football. We are at Twin Peaks in Madison. Derek will be here at the top of the hour. Chris Sanders will be here at the top of the hour. We will remember the life of Titans legend Frank Wycheck. Today, we will continue to do so during the pregame show. Coach Les Steckel will join us at 4:30. John McClain will join us at 5 o'clock as we continue to remember Frank. I do want to touch on this, though. How did you guys experience watching football yesterday? For me, Ian, I'm just going to tell you how it was for me yesterday. I went upstairs in my house, and I got on the elliptical, and I've learned that if I set the incline all the way down and I set the resistance low, that it's kind of like walking. I mean, it's not the exact same as walking, but it's not like it's running or hard cardio or anything like that. So I decided instead of sitting my fat ass on the couch to watch the game, I was going to get my fat ass on the elliptical, and I was going to watch the games yesterday while at least moving in some sort of fashion. And I got depressed. And I'll tell you why. Because the AFC stinks.
A lot of ugly football.
It's wide freaking open. And again, I get the multi-view with YouTube TV where you can watch like all the different games if you got Sunday Ticket at one time. And so I've got I had the Texans game on one, I had the Colts game on another, I had the Red Zone channel, I had the Falcons game, and then on a little tablet I had the Jacksonville game. And so I'm watching all these games at one time, and all they're doing is flashing up like those playoff pictures. And it's like, in the hunt, the Raiders. And I'm like, they suck. In the hunt, the Jets. I'm like, ah. And what just kills me is the reason that you're not in the hunt or that you're not in a playoff spot is because you absolutely royally screwed up the offseason this past year. Royally sucked this offseason. Now, the jury's out on the draft because we don't know if any of these players are going to be good long-term players. We have no idea. We don't know if Peter Skoronski is going to be Chance Warmack or not. He's got some good moments, but he's got some Chance Warmack moments too. Tajay Spears is a running back. You can get a running back anywhere. Levis, we'll see. Somebody told me, this draft's so good, he's a franchise quarterback. I'm like, whoa. We're probably like 2 years away from knowing whether or not Will Levis is a franchise quarterback. And if we know before those 2 years, then it'll either be really, really good or really, really bad. But as far as free agency, everything, this was a 7-win football team last year that was within 3 inches, a referee's call one way or another, from making the playoffs. And they blew it in free agency. Andre Dillard, Arden Key, Luke Gifford, Sean Murphy-Bunting, Trevon Wesco, Azeez Al-Shaair, Daniel Brunskill. I mean, I guess Brunskill's fine. Chris Moore I do like, but he doesn't. That's what they did in the first wave of free agency. DeAndre Hopkins and Chris Hubbard, who are probably their 2 best free agent acquisitions, came later. I mean, the team they put together for this year was, hey, let's try to be competitive. Let's take a team out there we think we can win with, and let's sign Andre Dillard, Arden Key, Daniel Brunskill, Luke Gifford. Let's bring these guys in, and that's going to make us competitive. They blew it. Coaching, I think, is certainly culpable in some of this, right? They kept the special teams coach who had been so bad that I literally asked the head coach at the beginning of the offseason, why are you keeping this special teams coach? To which he got all defensive and defiant, and again, we know who was right about that one. It was me. The offensive line coach, Vrabel calls up some guy that has no experience. And again, I think Dillard sucks. And I think Brewer, I don't understand how you pay him $4.3 million. I didn't understand it at the time. I still don't understand it today, other than pure stupidity. But this line should be better than it is. But they don't have a line coach. They got this schmo. So coaching is culpable. But just think about this. The Saints game, the first Colts game, the Steelers game, the second Colts game. You should have won all those games. You should have won every single one of those. Now, what if you just had a couple better players? What if instead of Arden Key, you had signed a pass rusher that actually can sack the quarterback? What if instead of Andre Dillard, you signed a left tackle that actually could block somebody? What if you had just kept David Long Jr. instead of letting him go to the Dolphins, where he leads them in tackles? We'll see him tonight. Instead of Aziz, who is no David Long Jr. But they didn't keep David Long Jr. Why? Because Vrabel can't possibly think that the trainers or the training staff or the way they prepare the players or the way they maintain the players or anything like that could have been at fault. It has to be the players' fault, so they let David Long Jr. go, and David Long Jr.'s played every game, and they replace him for the same money with a backup in Aziz. Don't buy the excuses. I got probably every which way you could possibly tell me the excuses that this offseason wasn't a complete disaster for the Titans. I got yesterday. And Ian, you know what the number one excuse was I got the entire time?
What was that?
Guess.
Money? Salary cap?
Cap. J-Rob ruined the cap. It was so bad. I looked it up yesterday because I was like, you know what? I need to really, I need to, these people keep talking about how, oh yeah, this team, they were horrible. John Robinson screwed up the cap. There was nothing they could do. So this is a Pro Football Focus article. Now, this is not like the Pro Football Focus grading, which I don't believe in. This is just, again, Pro Football Focus went to some website and pulled up, the salary cap space. This was in February of last year. So before free agency. This was the cap space. The Titans were 18th, and I don't even believe in the cap. I think it's all fake. I think this is another example of how it's fake, but you guys believe that it's real because the media, for some reason, keeps talking about it like it's real. I don't get it. It doesn't make any sense. It's fake. It's not real. It's baloney. It's fakakta. It's bullcrap. Anywho, the Chiefs had less salary cap space than you did. They signed the top right tackle on the market in Jawan Taylor. The Broncos, they signed one of the top tackles. The Broncos had less cap space than you. They did sign the top right tackle on the market in Mike McGlinchey. They also signed Zach Allen, a pass rusher, Ben Powers, a guard, and surprise, the Broncos are better. The 49ers had less cap space than you, and they signed Javon Hargrave to a massive contract. The Ravens had less cap space than you, and they signed Lamar Jackson to a $200 million contract, and they signed Odell Beckham for a ridiculous amount of money. So all these teams beneath you, for all you salary cap people out there, all of these teams had less cap than you did. So why could they go get Javon Hargrave and you couldn't? Why could they get Mike McGlinchey and you couldn't? Why could they get Jawan Taylor and you couldn't? Somebody care to explain that to me? Now, real money, that's real. But if you're sitting there and saying, well, Amy didn't have the money, well, you did that to yourself then. That's not an excuse. That's just your financial predicament, and you need to start spending some more money, especially when you have $1.2 billion of our money coming to you. So don't listen to the excuses. This commission, coach and GM, and I include them both in there because by including them both in there, nobody gets singled out, nobody gets left out of the blame. You're both guilty. They screwed up. They had a terrible offseason. And you're not competing for the playoffs because of that terrible offseason. You guys bitch about John Robinson like he's the boogeyman. I don't get it. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. The guy won 61% of his games. I don't know about you. I enjoyed when the Titans were competitive. I enjoy when the Titans were going to the AFC Championship game. I enjoyed when the Titans were winning the division. But you guys talk about John Robinson like he doesn't know if the football is pumped or stuffed, which I think is crazy talk. But in his first year as GM, he brought in Ben Jones, who could play football. He brought in Rashard Matthews, who had 9 touchdowns his first season with the Titans. He traded for Dennis Kelly, who's better than any of the schmoes these bozos have come up with on your offensive line. It was a disastrous offseason, and it didn't need to be. And the disastrous offseason has led to the disastrous season, where we are sitting here looking at tonight's game, and it's like, Lord, please be with the Titans today. Please do not let them lose by 100 points. Amen. That's where we are. And I got so many people making excuses yesterday. They were like, Jared, our cap was screwed up. And I'm like, you had more cap space than the Broncos. Somebody was like, we're paying Bud Dupree too much money. You're not paying Bud Dupree any money. What are you talking? You cut him. But again, you go to a website and see dead cap, and you go, and it's okay. Because I used to think like that too. Until I saw the New Orleans Saints for the umpteenth time be $90 trillion over the salary cap and then go sign a $100 million quarterback, who, by the way, sucks. And they suck. But don't buy these. They screwed up. Now, does that mean that they didn't learn their lessons from this year and they could do better next year? I don't know. But they screwed up. Like, let's keep it real. They screwed up. And instead of, again, the rest of the AFC where everybody has a chance to make the playoffs, here we are getting ready for a butt whooping on Monday Night Football. Hope you enjoy it. 615-737-1025 is our phone number. We'll get your thoughts on that. 615-737-1025. If you want to weigh in on the program, we will do that. Plus, Will Levis tonight against the Dolphins, and I am worried. And I am worried about one thing in particular. And I don't know if you guys realize this could be an issue, but I'm just going to tell you, it could be an issue. We'll do that next. Pre-game show starts at 4 o'clock. Stillman and Company, 102.5, 106.3 The Game. Let's knock out some of these for the fine folks, again, as we are live today out at Twin Peaks, again, for the pre-game show today. Preds fans, do not miss Wednesday night Smashville Live at Brewhouse South in Cool Springs at 6 o'clock, where the special guests will be Cole Smith and Tommy Novak. And Smashville Live is brought to you by the Black Abbey Brewing Company. And tomorrow's your chance to participate in Preds Pick to Click. If you correctly guess a Preds player that scores a goal in the game tomorrow night, you will win a pair of tickets to an upcoming Preds home game. Participate with Robbie and Rexroad tomorrow at 8:45. Pick to Click is brought to you by TJ Anderson Homes of Benchmark Realty. List your home with TJ to get your home seen, heard, and sold.
Looking forward to this one too, a Monday night playing Miami. Is this one you kind of eyed as well?
For sure, yeah. I knew that we only had a couple, primetime games for the season, and so knowing that we had, Monday Night Football in Miami, especially expecting them to be a solid team, which they definitely are, and we're excited to go out there and compete with them. But Monday Night Football doesn't get much better than that. I've been watching it since a kid, and being able to go out there on that stage for the first time is going to be really special.
There you go. That was Will Levis talking about Monday Night Football tonight, his first Monday Night Football game. He did play in a Thursday night game, but this is his first Monday game. And I just want you to know I'm scared to death. And I'm not exactly scared to death of Will Levis getting hurt, though that certainly could play a role. The Dolphins are third in the NFL in sacks, and quite frankly, your offensive line's terrible, especially on the road. And I don't know why that is, and I don't even think there's really a reason as to why that is, but apparently that's just how it is. But that's not why I'm worried. Here's what I'm worried about. The Titans have no receivers outside of DeAndre Hopkins, and the Dolphins have three guys in the secondary who are better as far as, that are good DBs that will take Hopkins out of the game. Ramsey, Howard, Holland. So forget about DeAndre, because they're not going to let DeAndre Hopkins beat him. So that means that you're going to be relying on Chig and Burks, and the reason why you're 4-8 is because you've been relying on Chig and Burks. So that's not really going to work out for you. So then, in comes Levis. What's really going to happen tonight? You know they're not going to let Derrick Henry run the football. They're going to load the box, and every time Derrick Henry touches it, there's going to be three guys in the backfield 2 yards deep. So Derrick's not going to be able to run the ball unless you throw them out of that, and you're probably not going to be able to do that. So when Will Levis plays a Monday Night Football game tonight, and his final line is 13 of 31 for 109 yards and 2 interceptions, the narrative is going to become that Will Levis sucks. That's going to be the narrative. Now, it's not right, because every rookie quarterback fails when they don't have any good pieces around them. Look at Bryce Young. C.J. Stroud yesterday didn't even throw for 100 yards before getting knocked out in the fourth quarter because Tank Dell, Nico Collins, and Dalton Schultz were all hurt. Well, Will Levis and Bryce Young have been living that almost every week. And so what happens in these games, even though there is a nuance to it, like understand the reason for why Will Levis goes 13 of 31 for 109 and 2 picks. What happens is far too often sucks. That's it. He sucks. And that's the national narrative. And then all of a sudden that starts to seep in, and it becomes part of the discourse surrounding the guy's confidence. You can't tell me that Bryce Young has confidence right now dealing with what he's dealing with. You can't. I couldn't believe it. Not with the crap team he's got. It's like I heard that part of the reason why the owner of the Panthers fired Frank Reich was because look at what Bryce Young is doing compared to what C.J. Stroud's doing. C.J. Stroud's got a $30 million left tackle. You've got a busted left tackle. C.J. Stroud's got 4 receivers. You've got old man Adam Thielen. C.J. Stroud has a tight end. You don't have anything. That team sucks. You're going to blame Bryce Young for that? And while it's crazy to blame Bryce Young for that, guess what? Yes. So even though we will understand why Levis struggles, the narrative surrounding him will be, sucks. That's just how the NFL works. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. But that's the case. Every good quarterback that's got great players around them always gets way too much credit. Brock Purdy gets too much credit. Jalen Hurts gets too much credit. All these guys get way too much credit. Mahomes was a better quarterback when he had Tyreek to throw the ball to, too. He's still got Kelsey. But now we look at him, we're like, they can't even get lined up right. Oh, my goodness. So I'm worried about Levis. 615-737-1025. Your phone line's driven by WilsonCountyHyundai.com. Texter says into the text line, it amazes me you still harp on 3 inches to the playoffs. I think it's safe to say they win one of the last 7 they would have been in the playoffs last year. Let me say this. That's not true. So what's weird is had they won that Cowboy game that preceded that Ravens game or that Jacksonville game, then it wouldn't have mattered. They had to win one of the 2 Jacksonville games or win 2 other games, right? So if they won Chargers and Texans, but then they didn't win, if they had won Chargers and Texans, then we're talking about a different story. But they didn't. They just needed to win one of the Jacksonville games, and they didn't. By 6 inches, that second Jacksonville game. The first one was because the owner kind of threw everybody under the bus. 615-737-1025. We're back to your phones on the Titans here on the program. We'll do that next. Again, we are live out here at Twin Peaks in Madison. The pregame show starts at 4 o'clock. And again, we will remember the legacy of Titans legend Frank Wycheck at 4 o'clock. Chris Sanders, Derek Mason will be with us. Les Steckel at 4:30. John McClain at 5 o'clock. To remember a Titans legend. 102.5 The Game is teamed up with Mookie Betts' AIM Foundation to help underprivileged members of our community. You can email bids now and enter your bids at gmail.com. Enter your bids at gmail.com. Okay, you can email bids in now at enteryourbids at gmail.com for either the family package, which includes a Mookie Betts t-shirt, hats, a miniature Dodger baseball bat, and a Mookie Betts autographed baseballs, or the game day package, which includes a $500 Southwest gift card, a Mookie Betts jersey, a Dodgers hat, and Dad Gang hats. I don't know what that is, but I'm sure it's great. 2 tickets to a Dodgers game in Los Angeles and a photo op with Mookie. Email your bids now at enteryourbids at gmail.com. Let me say this. Mookie still owes me 2 tickets to a game that I won back in 2020. In the silent auction of the Mookie Betts thing. But then 2020 happened, and I just didn't feel right, Ian, asking Mookie for tickets that are 3 years. Like, hey, man,
don't forget.
I won this package. But then over the weekend, I started to think about changing my mind a little bit about asking Mookie for tickets from 4 years ago.
I'm sure he'd figure something out. He'd hook you up with something.
Well, you know why over the weekend I started to change my mind a little bit, right?
Something happened over the weekend?
Are you serious? You're kidding, right?
Maybe.
They signed Ohtani for $700 million.
Gotcha. Yes,
there
I
you
did
go.
see that.
615-737-1025. Stillman & Company, 102.5, 106.3 The Game.
as you peruse this roster and you see kind of where things stand right now, do you feel like this team is maybe just a few fixes away from being a contender again, or do you feel like that there's major changes that?
No, this is a competitive team. This is a competitive team, and we can win football games. But at the end of the year, you evaluate your roster every year, and you're always looking for ways to improve that. And so that's what we're going to do here. Although I feel the team is competitive and we're good, the objective is not be good. The objective is to be great. And so we're going to continue to work to build a great roster, and that's going to be every year, so you can always take it to a new height. So that's going to be our approach.
Financial constraints that you have and 6 picks enough?
Sure. I'm never going to say that it's not enough. I don't know any different. We're all at the same point.
There you go. That was Vrabel and Rand Carthon before the year. Hey, so when you look at this roster, do you think you need to rebuild a little bit? No. This is a competitive team. We will be competing this year, but, we're always going to try to get a great roster. So either they lied, which, again, is the problem. They come out and say, no, those reports aren't true. We love each other. We kiss. We make up. We're great. But how can I trust you if you were lying before, like Rand Carthon at the Combine said he needs to get to know Bud Dupree, and then the next day he cut him, when I don't think Bud Dupree flew to Indianapolis to get to know Rand Carthon in that day. Or they thought they had a competitive team. They thought they knew what they were doing, and it ended up being Andre Dillard. And that's why here we are. The AFC is a total mess. I mean, I don't even know who's the best team in the AFC. I mean, seriously. Like, honestly, it's probably the Ravens or the Dolphins. Like, that. How crazy is that? But here we are. No hope to win tonight. No expectation. Playoffs are gone. You're not even in the hunt. The Raiders are in the hunt. You're not in the hunt. And that's depressing. Mike says the reason we complained about John Robinson is because we knew this day would come where the Titans have a bad team with it says no debt. What does that mean? A bad team with no debt.
Depth, maybe?
That's probably what he's looking for. No depth. His bad drafts have caught up to the team. I don't disagree with that. And if the Titans were 4-8 right now, let's say John Robinson had finished out last year, and let's say they had won the division, because I believe that they would have won the division if John Robinson hadn't gotten fired in the middle of the year, and I know people disagree with me. There's no way for us to know that. But if this team were this bad this year with John Robinson as general manager, he'd be on the hot seat, and he probably should be fired at the end of the year. And I would probably be on the air saying, enough's enough. But I'm not going to blame Andre Dillard. I'm not blaming this team on him. On Andre Dillard and Arden Key and, these they brought in a bunch of bums. And I'm not blaming John Robinson for that. For the guys that they brought in. And it's like, well, but he missed on these draft picks. Well, no crap he missed on the draft picks. If he hit on the draft picks, he'd still be the general manager. How about this? San Francisco lit 4 first-round draft choices on fire. Literally lit them on fire. Like if you were to take $4,000 in stacked money and just light it on fire. That's what San Francisco did with the 3 first-round picks they used on Trey Lance and the draft choice of Javon Kinlaw. But you can still build a decent team. You can still sign free agents, trade for guys. You can still build a decent team. Draft guys like Brock Purdy and Hufanga and things like that. I mean, it's still possible. So this idea of like, oh, yeah, no, this is what we were afraid of with J-Rob. Well, why not let J-Rob have the J-Rob problem, and then you can blame it on J-Rob. But this team's not J-Rob's fault. J-Rob's never, and he inherited the worst team in the NFL. As in, he got the job with the number 1 pick. J-Rob has never had a team that is this bad or this out of it this early in the season. Ever. And you guys just ignore it like, oh, no, Rand's doing great. Vrabel's doing great. They're doing great. And I'm like, oh, my goodness gracious. One texter says, Jared, why don't you get it? The Titans are cheap. Look, you said it, not me. I'm not sure I totally believe the narrative. that the Titans are cheap? Like, after they didn't sign A.J. Brown and they traded him, everyone was like, cheap, 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 cheap. And I was like, I don't know. I think that this was a business decision as far as, like, his attitude and his injury history and his Twitter fingers. And they thought they could get, Traylon Burks could be what A.J. And look, Traylon Burks is a bust. We all know that. But I thought that was more of like a philosophy thing than it was a money thing. Maybe I'm wrong. And if that's the case, then Rand Carthon shouldn't have taken this job. If the Titans don't have money to spend, he comes from San Francisco where they spend money. And if he came here and when he was interviewing for the job and they're like, hey, man, we're going to spend $100 million less than the good teams, then he should not have taken this job. And again, acquisition of players is not just the only problem here. Vrabel's coaching staff stinks. I talked to somebody over the weekend, about Vrabel and Rand and the situation the Titans find themselves in, and it's a mess. But the one thing, I felt like whom I was talking to kind of had a pro-Vrabel agenda, and it was all about Rand this, Rand that, Rand screwed this up, Rand this, Rand, it was all that. I'm like, Vrabel's not blameless in this. Because this coaching staff is a joke. And Vrabel's fought tooth and nail with me over the coaching staff. And as we all learned last week, I was right, he was wrong. So coaching's a part of this too. One texter says, look at the losses with John Robinson gone. There is more to it than bad drafts, and a key leadership spot is definitely missing. One texter into the text line when talking about the Titans says, Kevin Byard was my favorite player, but he's lost a step. That trade is looking better and better every time he plays. I'm going to trust Rand moving forward. I'm sorry, what did Kevin Byard do that was so bad last night? I mean, I think that what happens is when Kevin Byard plays for the Eagles, you guys just watch him on every snap, and I know you do because I do the same thing. You watch him on every play, and when you don't see him intercept the ball, it's like, what was he doing there? Whereas the job of the safety, first and foremost, is to not allow people to run right by you for touchdowns. What happened in the Jacksonville game? They ran right by you for a touchdown. What happened in the Colts game? Twice. They ran right by you, once for a touchdown, the other time that set up the game-winning touchdown. That is traditionally the job of a safety. And they even brought it up. Collinsworth did on the broadcast last night that was like, I forget what injury it was to the Eagles. But Collinsworth was like, this injury to the Eagles is going to take Byard out of that kind of corner dime role into just a straight-up safety role. It might have been Blankenship's injury.
I think that's what it was.
Remember.
Yeah, I think he left the game with a concussion, Blankenship.
Yeah. So Byard's just playing straight safety the whole game. But you watched last night, right, Ian?
Off and on, yeah.
I didn't think Byard did anything bad.
Well, their secondary has been getting torched. So when
their secondary sucks.
So when your secondary gets torched, I think you just get generalized, grouped into that. They have some good corners. Slay's still on the team, so I'm not sure.
Well, remember when they had no pass rush in 2020? And it was like, Byard signed his contract, and Byard's not good anymore, and Byard. And then they got some pass rushers the next year. They bring in Nico Autry and Bud Dupree, and all of a sudden Byard's good again. Texter says, was it a bad staff last year before all the injuries or 2 years ago when they were the 1 seed? Yes, Michael. See Todd Downing. Yes. Texter says, saying Vrabel and Rand are doing a good job is indicative of the history of this franchise. Titan fans are good with being 8-8, 7-9, 9-7. Texter said, when J-Rob got run, did his underlings go as well, meaning those who evaluate college talent? No, they did not. In fact, one thing that I don't want to say bothers me, but they kind of treat us like we're stupid, is when they talk about all the collaborating that goes around. And it's like, well, it's not just Mike and Rand, but there's Chad Brinker, there's Anthony Robinson, there's Brian Gardner, there's Kevin Turks, there's Brandon Taylor, there's the coaching staff. Everybody's involved in the decisions. I'm like, you do realize that's what every other team does too. Like, you're not the first team in the history of football that has an assistant general manager. You do realize that, right? Barry Trotz came on the show last week, and he was talking about our analytics department told me this, and that he's got assistant GMs too. You think those guys just don't show up to work and Barry just does that? Of course not. But at the end of the day, Barry makes the decisions. At the end of the day, somebody has to make the decisions for the Titans. I just don't know who does it. And to answer your question about J-Rob's underlings, Brandon Taylor, Brian Gardner, Kevin Turks, I believe all those guys were part of the J-Rob crew. The scouts, for the most part, have not changed. They were part of the J-Rob crew. So there is a lot of John Robinson still left in the front office, which, if those guys stink, that at this point is not John Robinson's fault. It's not his fault. 615-737-1025. I have a trivia question that we will get to, and we'll give something away as well. But I have a Titans Monday night trivia question. In fact, the first time the Titans played on Monday Night Football as the Titans, Derek, who's here, started. Chris, who's here, started. Who was the first Titan to score a touchdown on Monday Night Football? I'll have the answer for you on the other side. Be thinking about that. Stillman and Company, 102.5, 106.3 The Game. Let's talk about Twice Daily. That's right. Download that Twice Daily app right now, because you download the Twice Daily app, and if the Titans score in the last 2 minutes of either half today, then you get a free half sub tomorrow from our friends at Twice Daily. That's right. How about that? So download the Twice Daily app and join the loyalty program, where it pays to be a member with Twice Daily. You'll earn points and save money. Get what you crave at Twice Daily. Made to order sandwiches, bakery, breakfast, cold drinks. Of course, stop by the beer cave to unwind with a cold one. If you're looking for convenience, Twice Daily has you covered. Twice Daily is fresh all day. And once again, if they score in the last 2 minutes, the Titans, in either half today, of either half, you will get a free half sub in the app tomorrow. So download that app today. Stillman and Company, 102.5, 106.3 The Game.
You bring Pickens in. You got Big Ben. Year in, year out, Wycheck leads the team 4 years in a row. He's doing it again this year. Well-designed play. It's going to be a fake screen out to George, and then to the inside comes Wycheck. He gets some nice help down the field. Benji Olsen. A little bit of a slow block on Ronaldo Wynn, but this is well-designed by Mike Heimerdinger. Kevin Long out in front. Now they're inside the 5.
Jags are just thankful it wasn't Aaron Kinney coming down there.
On first and goal, Eddie George gets taken down. Nice play by Darius coming up from the secondary. One reason I think Wycheck is so dangerous, not only tonight, but in every game, but particularly tonight as they go without a huddle, is the absence of Hardy Nickerson, the linebacker. Here is McNair throwing off balance, and that is juggled and then caught by Wycheck. So the Titans go without a huddle, and Coughlin exasperated because he winds up with the defensive end, Ronaldo Wynn, covering Wycheck.
Yeah, and this is another case where maybe teams are catching on to the Dom Capers style of defense, but no style of defense can stop an effort that Frank Wycheck gave his quarterback on this play.
Monday Night Football 2000, Nissan Stadium, the first ever Monday Night Football game, the first ever Titans touchdown on Monday Night Football by Frank Wycheck. And you heard right there, Ian actually said to me when we played that cut, Ian said that he forgot Dennis Miller did that 1 year on Monday Night Football. What a train wreck of a guy who adds nothing. But you heard also Dan Fouts talk about how I don't think there's anybody who could have defended that wonderful catch by Frank Wycheck. And it's like one texter put in earlier today when they said, you know, the reason why Frank was a part of so many big moments in Titans history, whether it was the miracle, whether it was that touchdown, whether it was the big touchdown in the playoff game against the Steelers, whether is because Frank Wycheck made those moments. And so as we begin the pregame show coming up, we'll remember the legacy of Frank Wycheck. Coach Les Steckel will join us on the program. John McClain will join us on the pregame show. You know, we don't normally have guests on the pregame show, but we will today as we remember the legacy and what Frank Wycheck meant to the city of Nashville and the sports community here and the Titans and the league and everything else. I do want to share this, though. The Reese family sent me a statement last night to read on the show on the passing of Frank Wycheck saying, quote, "We are deeply saddened to hear of the far too early loss of a great Titan and terrific person, Frank Wycheck. Frank was an integral part of years of Titan success, but he was also so much more than that. We are praying that God provides his girls and family comfort during this terribly difficult time." Again, that coming from the Reese family. All I can tell you is, unlike the two guys that are going to join us when we start the pregame show at the top of the hour, all I can tell you is, in my experience, as a fan of Frank Wycheck's, as a fan that cheered on Frank Wycheck for the first era of Titan football, the first successful era of Titan football. You know, the window is really closing on the second successful era of Titans football, but the first era was Steve McNair, Eddie George, Javon Kearse, Derek Mason, Chris Sanders, Blaine Bishop, Frank Wycheck. And so he was an incredibly popular player. And then when he had left the league, he went right to the broadcast booth and right to the radio. And I mean this as somebody who really, truly understands the game, like understands radio and everything else. When I say understand that, I'm not talking about football. I'm talking about radio. Frank might have had a more successful radio career than he had a football career. And he's one of a handful of tight ends that have 500 career catches. And he still might have had a more successful radio career than football career, which tells you something about that guy. And I've always said this. I heard Mad Dog Russo say this, and I couldn't agree more. It takes three things to be a good radio host. One, you have to be knowledgeable. Two, you have to have a personality. And three, you have to know how to run a radio program. Well, with Kevin and Mark and Frank, those dudes were knowledgeable, those dudes had personality, and Kevin knew how to kind of keep those guys in check and run the radio program. And that's what made them all so successful. Just like how Frank was an incredibly important part of the Titans team that became the AFC champions and were competing for Super Bowls, he was part of an equally as successful team on the radio. That's just what I remember of Frank Wycheck as somebody who didn't know him, who cheered for him, who got in the car every morning on the way to school and listened to him. And again, a legendary presence in Nashville, gone far too soon at 52 years of age. His former teammates, Chris Sanders and Derek Mason, join us to start the pregame show. And we will do that coming up next. Live from Twin Peaks out in Madison, 102.5, 106.3 The Game.